Hi, I'm Randee Dawn, author of Tune In Tomorrow, and you're tuned in to So Booking Cool.
So booking, so booking, so booking cool.
There's so motherfucking cool. So listen to So Booking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool, it's Julby. Today's guest is a veteran journalist, national pop culture and entertainment expert, and author. She's worked as editor at The Hollywood Reporter and Soap Opera Digest. You can find her writing on Today.com, Variety, and the LA Times, to name a few. She once appeared on Law & Order and later co-authored Law & Order Special Victims Unit, The Unofficial Companion with Susan Green. Her short stories have graced more than 10 anthologies. Her standalone title includes Home for the Holidays, stories to gnaw lightly on your brain. She creates trivia questions for BigBrain.com, and once a month she hosts rooftop readings in Brooklyn. Her debut novel, Tune In Tomorrow, the curious, calamitous, cockamamie story of Star Weatherby and the greatest mythic reality show ever, continues to get stellar reviews and was praised by Ellen Kushner and Andy Cohen. Here with us today, she is Randee Dawn. Stay tuned for our conversation, only on So Booking Cool.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today, Randee. So you recently attended Comic-Con, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my first time.
Yeah, give us some of your impressions about how that went.
So I was at Comic-Con for two different reasons. First of all, I'd never been to one, but I got invited by both my publisher, Rebellion Books. I'll do a lot of comics and things like that, but they have a subset, a publisher within the whole main company called Solaris, and they're the ones who put out Tune In Tomorrow. So I was there to sign some books. And then I had done a separate marketing thing with a company called Tea and Absinthe. And they make little fan-based teas. So if you go to their booths or if you go online, you can find them, and they have like TARDIS tea, or they have Steven Universe tea and things like that. They're a lot of fun, and they're very hooked into the sort of, the fandom side of things. And in my book, as you may remember, if you've gotten to that part in the book, there's a section where the helpers of the actors on this reality show, which we'll talk more about, I'm assuming, the helpers are brownies, which is kind of the mythical creature that is very helpful and will do whatever you need around the house. They are so helpful in this book that they will turn themselves into tea. So, of course, they do reconstitute, so it's only semi-horrifying. But when I decided that it'd be great if we had a brownie flavored tea that was called Tune In Tomorrow through Tea and Absinthe. And they said, hey, we're going to be at Comic-Con. Do you want to come and try to sell some of the books? So we did a whole thing where if you bought the book, you got 2 little sachets of the brownie tea. It was very limited edition. And so I kind of bounced back and forth between these 2 different booths. So that was mostly my experience with Comic-Con. I did get a small amount of time to wander around and see the booths. I didn't get in any panels, I'm sorry to say. So my Comic-Con experience was a little less than some people's might have been, but it was kind of what I thought it was going to be. It was like amazing costumes, enormous amount of cosplay, and like the floor that I was on was the big trading floor. So there was just so many things you could buy. If you're a fan of whatever universe or any comic, or any TV show that has a genre influence, you could buy T-shirts and toys and other costume parts. I mean, it was just amazing. So it's kind of just. I've been to other conventions, and it's one thing I love about them is it's a bit like being immersed in the world, in a whole different world. You stepped away from reality where you have to do very boring things, and you enter this world where everybody likes the stuff that you like, and you have this common language to talk, and Comic-Con is like that times 100.
Yeah, you outlined it perfectly. And you said it was your first time, right?
It was. I haven't been to the San Diego Comic-Con or anything like that either.
Okay, so first time as an author and first time as like a fan of the event.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of my people. So I was interested in seeing who had gone and everything. I ran into a couple of people that I knew, and some people that I knew were doing some of their own press, so they came over and interviewed me, which was really nice. And my agent showed up, and it was just kind of a nice place to gather and see people that if I didn't know them, I felt like I knew them. You know what I mean? Like when you go to a place that you feel confident and comfortable in, it's like, oh, I can approach these people. I can talk to these people. And I told so many people about the book. So, and I sold a lot too. It was great. I sold like nearly 30 copies. So it's great.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know.
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to discuss the book more, but I want to start off with how things got started for you. So, when did your interest in journalism begin, and when did it begin specifically in entertainment journalism?
So I've always wanted to be a writer, and I started with fiction first, but then I started getting really all practical and everything when I was like in middle school. And I was thinking, how can I, it's very hard to get published. I don't know if I can even write well enough to get published, but what can I do with this writing? And my mom said, oh, you could be a journalist. And I'm like, what is that? And I grew up in the Maryland, DC area, and there was a great journalist from the area, Jim Vance, who was the guy I grew up with watching news. And she said, oh, you could be like Jim Vance. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's great. I could do that. He's on TV. That could be interesting. And so I just started taking journalism classes, and I was on the school paper in high school. And I think part of the reason I ended up getting into journalism was, it let me write. I got published. I saw my name. You get this little attagirl every time you get your name published on something. It's like, oh, well, I can at least do this. And when I was in college and I started taking journalism courses, I went to Boston University and I studied with their communications school. I think part of it was, although I really enjoyed it, I don't feel like I had the confidence to do things that was really hard-hitting news. And I thought, well, I can write about music. I love music. And that's where I got started. I started writing about music rather than hard journalism. And when you're in college, you get all sorts of free stuff because they're like, ooh, college audience, we want to get people into this. So that was really where it got started. And I was freelancing for publications and getting paid for it towards the end of my college degree. And just kept it going, really. I worked in radio, I worked in cable access TV, I worked in mostly print. I really just like print. I'm kind of a solitary writer, and I like sitting down and being able to tackle the whole project either on my own or just by making a few phone calls. So it fit my personality also.
Right. Okay. So aside from you realizing the type of journalism that you wanted to do, like hard news was not for you, what other takeaways did you have from your journalism education?
Well, one thing I will say is that a good journalist is both a good listener and really nosy. So I had to learn the listening part because, like a lot of people, I think you kind of want to jump in with your part of the thing. It's like, oh, well, when you finish telling me about you, I will tell you about me. I think a lot of people do that. So you have to sort of learn to be a good listener. But I was also extremely curious. When I would talk to people, I would try to get a full picture of who they are and where they're coming from and why they behave a certain way. And that led to just more and more questions. I mean, you do a lot of interviewing, so you probably know some of this also. But as you talk to somebody, if you're actually engaging and listening to them, you will hear them start to paint a picture of themselves. And if you can pull more questions out of that by being an active listener. So I was just super nosy. And the other thing too is I was also writing fiction on the side all this time, and it helped me create characters. Not that I was interviewing somebody and putting them in a book, but when you learn the different gray areas that people have and you learn the different ways that they think about the world, I think it helps later on when you want to create a fictional character, because you realize nobody is just one thing. Nobody is entirely their background, but nobody can totally escape their background. So it helps you with fashioning characters that feel real or lived in.
So when did your relationship with books begin, and how did it begin?
Oh, I've been a reader since before I could read, if that makes any sense. I mean, my mom would read to me, or I learned to read. My mom says, so you can take it for whatever you believe. My mom said I was reading by like, 2 or 3. So do you believe that? Maybe, but that's what she told me. So I've always been a big reader. I'm a big library geek. I was a good student, so I didn't skip school much, but one of the very few times I did skip classes, I skipped so I could go to the library. That's the kind of book reader I am. I'm just happy sitting down in a quiet room with a book and escaping into that vision of somebody else's world. And those are my favorite books, the ones that really pull me in and make me able to see how the world operates. So yeah, I was a fiction reader very early on, and I was a fiction writer, fairly soon after that. So I started writing about my stuffed animals at one point.
Oh, what kind of stories were you writing about your stuffed animals, Randee?
Let's see. I mean, I was 7 or 8 years old, so the story constructions are pretty small. But I would play with the stuffed animals, like, oh, this one's the dad, and this one's the mom, and this is the kids, and just story would kind of come out of that. I remember I had one story where we had a boxing match between a father and a son, and I have no idea where that came from. But yeah, they were just really short little things. And then when I was in middle school, I was writing more like novels and basically writing in class, and teachers would think I was taking notes. And then I would hand the chapters to my friends and they would give me feedback, or I would read them to them on the phone after school. And so yeah, I graduated from very short stories about stuffed animals into more actual fiction stories later on.
And how are your friends reacting to your stories when you would share them with them? Share it with them.
Yeah, I mean, I got really good feedback. I think if I'd gotten really like, oh, this is terrible, you should never pick up a pencil again, I might have listened to them. But my friends were really excited about it. They loved what I was doing, and it was different than anything else they were being told to read. And I also had friends who liked to read anyway, so that was helpful. So I got really good feedback, but I was still kind of afraid to take it to that next step and take it out into the world and show it to people who didn't have some sort of emotional investment in my well-being. Do you know what I mean? That's an important next step for anybody who wants to get published, but it took me a long time to really feel comfortable doing that. And when I was getting started, I mean, this is, in the prehistoric ages, we didn't have the internet. So it was before I could just, join a group online or find some people in my local area who were meeting up. I mean, it was a much more closed off world, and you had to search quite a lot.
Okay. And where did you have to search? Like a newspaper, magazine?
I think that my first writers group really didn't happen until there was internet, and I found people who were also writers. I was on AOL, and we met each other through some sort of game program, and we were all writers, and they invited me in, and so that was probably my first writers group, and everything was through email. So when I was in college, I didn't show anybody really my fiction. I had one class in fiction, and again, I got decent feedback, but it didn't take me to that next level. So really, it wasn't until we started having the internet, like in the 90s and the early 2000s, that I started feeling like I can show it to people who know what they're talking about and who can give me constructive criticism and feedback. So, and even then, I was writing a lot of genre. I was writing science fiction, I was writing fantasy, and there's a real divide. People who read contemporary fiction or literature or that kind of thing tend to look down their noses on genre. So when I was getting their feedback, it didn't necessarily feel like I was getting knowledgeable feedback. Like, they could tell me if a sentence worked, but they were already skeptical about the whole premise in the first place. So I had to really dig even deeper to find people who wrote genre fiction and who could comment on it that way. And that really helped. I went to school in Boston, but then I moved to New York, and that really helped after I'd been in New York a little while, and I'd met some more people and was interacting more with authors who were local.
How did you get to interact with those authors when you moved to New York? Where did you go?
Let's see. So as a journalist, I also occasionally interviewed authors. And there are two terrific, well-known fantasy authors named Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman. And I had interviewed them while I was still in Boston because they were going to be speaking at a convention. And my editor said, you should talk to them to get to know more about this convention. And they were super friendly. I think when I met them, they weren't dating, but now they are actually married and everything. And they had great parties and they would invite me to their parties. And they were just super welcoming and brought me into the universe in a lot of ways. And then at the same time, I met some people who were encouraging me to go to these science fiction fantasy conventions. Now, we were just talking about Comic-Con. Comic-Con is kind of the top of the mountain here. It's got thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It's really enormous, but there are so many much smaller conventions of, 100 people to a couple thousand people that happen all over the country, all throughout the year. And the folks that I was meeting were saying, oh, you should go to LunaCon, which is, upstate New York, or you should go to Aregio, which is in Boston. And when I started going to those places, and I volunteered there, and I just met more people organically that way. There's an organization that I'm still a member of called Broad Universe, which is a networking organization for female and female identifying and non-binary authors, mostly who write genre, but it's not restrictive that way. And when I would go to these conventions, the Broad Universe people would have a table where they could sell their books, and they would do these readings, these rapid fire readings where 7 or 8 readers would read for 5 minutes at a time. And I realized I could join that. It's just $35 a year. Go ahead and join that. And once I did, I had a place to sell books. I had a place to read and get practice that way. I had an instant way to ask questions of people who had been through the process before. Mostly they do independent books. They don't necessarily do like the big 5 publisher type books, but they knew how to market and they knew how to create swag. I mean, I never would have come up with brownie tea if I had not, taken my lessons from meeting all these Broad Universe people. And then I also made friends. I have some very close friends who I made through that. So when I was much younger and they would say, oh, you have to network. I always thought network meant you had to go to a cocktail party and forcibly walk in on conversations and say, hi, I'm Randee and I'm a this. And it would be very awkward, almost like a blind date over and over again. And what I slowly learned was networking was just getting to know people within your field. You got to put yourself out there, but then it becomes organic when you start talking about the same things that you're interested in. So once I felt like I understood how the networking worked, then between Ellen and Delia introducing me to people and the Broad Universe people introducing me to people and me just meeting people generally at these conventions, I started just being able to surround myself with fellow writers who made me feel like I can be part of this. And so that's kind of where it's come from.
By the way, when you would go to these conventions and these author events, were you going by yourself or did you bring friends along? Did you want to bring friends along? And if so, were those friends, before you met Ellen, were these friends who were also interested in publishing?
So I didn't necessarily know a lot of people at any of the conventions that I went to. I knew a couple of people. There's a group of friends in the Cambridge, Somerville area who had regular parties and who I had met through the sister of a longtime friend from high school. So it was kind of like, there's a lily pad effect. My friend from high school didn't go to these parties, but her sister did. And her sister was getting married and told me, you should come to these parties. And I went to the parties. And while I was there, I met people who were in the publishing industry, and people in the publishing industry said, oh, you should go to this convention. And they were running the green room there, which is the special sort of gathering room for anybody who's going to be on panels. And by running it, they had to make food and they had to make sure everything was cleaned up. And, there's a whole backstage part of running any convention. So the first conventions that I went to, I volunteered because I didn't have any expertise to be on panels, and I wanted to make myself useful. I didn't want to just wander around from panel to panel. So I volunteered in the green rooms, and then I met more authors that way. And I got to know the people who I had met at the parties better. And So like I was saying, it's kind of this lily pad effect. One leads to another, leads to another. And so all of a sudden you look around and it's like, wait a minute, I do know a ton of people at these conventions. And then you start getting on panels and you meet even more people. So this has all been a process that has taken probably at least 10 years. I mean, if not more, because so I got married 11 years ago, and I was doing this before then. I have a tendency to milestone everything. Like, when did I get married? Oh yeah, because so this was before I got married. So we're looking at least 10, 11, 12 years.
Wow. So what was it like balancing your publishing pursuits while also working as a journalist in entertainment?
Right. You have to carve out the time to do the writing, because the writing is not going to happen by itself. And a lot of people will say, well, you've been writing all day. Do you actually want to then continue to write at night or first thing in the morning before you even start work? And the thing is, I'm not necessarily writing all day. I am interviewing, I'm pursuing contacts, I'm looking for story ideas. The writing part of journalism is only a fraction of everything else. So on the one hand, you're immersed in all that. I think this, and I think beyond that, it's true with anybody who has a full-time job and wants to publish a book or get a book out in the world. You've got to carve out that time, because you're not going to get paid for that book for a long time, if ever. And once you do, unless you hit the jackpot, it is not a lot of money. Okay, you're not doing this to make a ton of money. Every so often you'll hear about, oh, somebody got a 6-figure signing deal. And the reason you hear that is that it's so unusual. If it was usual, you wouldn't ever hear about that. So at this point, the writing, financially wise, is really kind of a hobby. It may never become a full-time or even a part-time job. Right now, it is something that I like to do, that I want to do, I feel like I need to do, and that pays me a little bit of money here and there. So if I wanted it to be done, it had to be something that I just took as seriously as any other hobby. If you were really into lacrosse, you'd go and train for lacrosse, and you'd play in lacrosse games, and you'd find places to do that. So I tended to either work late in the evening or first thing in the morning. I used to do very late in the evening when I was just freelancing and I didn't have a full-time job. I would go from like 11 o'clock in the evening to about 4 in the morning writing, because nobody calls you, it's very quiet out, there's absolutely nothing else to do unless you're going to go to sleep. But these days, now that I'm older, I have a tendency to want to wake up and have sort of a clear slate, an empty brain that hasn't already engaged in the internet or my emails or my work. And I tend to write first thing in the morning now for a couple of hours. So, and then sometimes later in the afternoon or the evening, whenever I have time. But those are the 2 time periods that work best for me.
Are you writing on your computer or your laptop or paper?
I don't write on paper. I know it sort of doesn't sound like you're a real writer unless you write on paper, but I don't write anything with a pen or paper anymore. Is that what you're like that too?
Right, yeah, it's easier for me to type.
Same here. The ideas and the thoughts and everything, I can keep up with them better if I'm typing. If I'm going to write, my hand's going to get cramped. I'm going to have to retype it later anyway. I admire people who like, oh yes, I have a longhand version of my story. I'm like, good for you. That's not for me.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it.
No, neither do I. It's so slow.
So how did the Law and Order book come along, and then how did you decide to transition from nonfiction into fiction?
Okay. So the first part of that, about how the Law and Order book happened, was some of the writing that I was doing when I wasn't sure if I would ever get published was fan fiction. And it was Law and Order fan fiction. And another woman and I created a webzine online for Law and Order fan fiction. But because I was already doing the journalism, and sometimes I was interviewing people from the show for actual articles that I was getting paid for, I would sometimes, put those interviews up on the website. And then I started expanding, like, oh, can I get somebody specifically for this website? And I spoke to Susan Green and Kevin Currier, who wrote the Law and Order Unofficial Companion. And we kept in touch, and Susan and I especially kept in touch. And a couple of years later, when she wanted to do the Law and Order SVU Unofficial Companion, Kevin wasn't interested in doing another book like that. And she said, I definitely need a partner on this. Do you want to do that? And I was like, yes, that's amazing. I had never been asked to do something like that before. So again, it's like I was saying earlier, things tend to not drop in your lap. It's not like tomorrow someone will call me up and say, oh, do you want to be the president? That would be weird. But things happen when you sort of set these little building blocks along. And if I hadn't wanted to write, if I hadn't wanted to just go for it and write some fan fiction, if I hadn't wanted to create the website or interview somebody specifically for the website, she would have never heard of me. She might have seen an article that I did and quoted or something in a book, but I would have never connected with Susan. So all these things just kind of build forward, and that's really how the Law and Order book happened. About transitioning from nonfiction into fiction, I'd always wanted to do that. Like I was saying earlier, I really wanted to be a fiction writer all along, but nonfiction felt like this stopgap that will actually pay the bills. So I think what happened is, after all of those connections that I made and other people's writing that I was reading, I think I became less intimidated by the whole process because I understood it better. And I started reading writers who had been published, and I would say, I think I can do that, or I might be able to do better than that. It's like you would read people who had self-published or independently published, and I'm thinking, I can do that. It doesn't have to look like, the greatest fiction that ever appeared in print. It's people want stories. So that gave me the confidence to start showing it around to the people I'd met at these conventions, the writers, the people in Broad Universe. And when I got good feedback, first of all, I got feedback in like, this is good, and here's how you can improve it, which is super important, I think, if you're going to accept criticism. If somebody just comes at you and says, yeah, I read it, and that's a mistake, and that's a mistake, and you shouldn't do it that way, you're not going to listen to that. But good criticism tells you, this is what works, and this is what was a problem for me. And then you, as the writer, need to be able to hear, that's great, what works, I'm happy about that. And then when you hear what doesn't work, make sure you understand that it doesn't work for them. So that doesn't mean it doesn't work, period. It just means that it didn't work for them. If you hear 5 or 6 people saying something similar, like, oh, this same exact thing didn't work for me, that's probably something you really need to work on. Mm-hmm. If only one person says this was a problem for me, then it's entirely up to you. Do you feel like that's something that maybe you want to clarify or make different in some way? And so I slowly learned how to accept criticism and also how to give it. And that helped with this transition. I was able to start sending out stories. I was able to start, applying for anthologies, and here's my story for this anthology. And then I started getting acceptances. When I'm trying to think, I got some stories. The first thing I think I remember getting accepted was a short story that I had written that was kind of a twist ending sort of murder mystery that had a Christmas theme. And I wrote it very quickly, and I didn't show it to too many people, and I sent it to this podcast that I really liked that kind of did pulp fiction. And they accepted it. I was like, that's amazing. I want to do more of that. And sometimes you get accepted, and sometimes it takes a long time to get accepted, and sometimes you have stories that never get accepted. I've got 2 whole novels that my agent thought were great, and she sent out to publishers, and the publishers didn't pick them up. Tune In Tomorrow is the 3rd novel that she sent around for me. So, I feel like I do have novels that I could still publish, but you got to find somebody who wants them. So yeah, it's just this whole process. So it's been this whole process. I'm still a journalist. I still write, all sorts of articles and reviews and things like that, because I need to pay the bills. Even with Tune In Tomorrow getting a full publishing deal, it didn't exactly free me up from having to pay bills.
Okay, right. What was it you think about Tune In Tomorrow that attracted publishers that time around, with it being the 3rd novel and it was a yes?
I wish I could say. What I will say is the 2 previous novels, which were both this urban contemporary fantasy, which basically means you take these mythical creatures or these folklore themes, but you put them in the modern world. I did that with those 2 previous books. It was more music based. I had, musicians and Irish fairies and stuff like that. And it was also I won't say it was super serious, but it was not, either one of them were funny books. I was just taking it literally and seriously. So after those two books didn't find homes, my agent said, maybe you should try something different, which of course leaves everything wide open, like, well, what different? And I started thinking about that phrase that everybody says, write what you know. And write what you know is good, but it also doesn't necessarily mean that when you're 20 years old, you should be writing memoirs, because, that's, your life, but that's it. But I think as you go on in years and you accrue this information and knowledge, that becomes what you know. So what I know is the entertainment industry. And I thought, well, I've already been doing that a little bit with music, but what if I found a TV related theme? And TV kind of on its own already is silly. I mean, it's very serious. It's a serious business and all of that, but writing fiction about TV doesn't exactly tell you to make it super serious. And I thought, well, I used to work for a soap opera magazine called Soap Opera Digest. And while I was there, I was like, what if I started writing short stories where there was an actor on a soap who decided to be a detective also in like his real life, and he's solving mysteries behind the scenes. It didn't go anywhere. But I had that planted in the back of my head. And although Tune In Tomorrow is about a reality TV show, it's kind of reality TV / soap opera, because a lot of reality TV shows are soaps, right? I mean, they're scripted, they're, a lot of cliffhangers, a lot of mundane stuff that goes on in people's lives. I mean, they're like the modern day soap operas. So I just kind of put all these pieces together, and I thought, I've never actually really written funny. Maybe I can try and write funny. And that seems to have worked. So all I can say is why did that appeal to the publishing industry? If I had that answer, I would make $1 million just telling people that answer. I think that the books that I had been writing before, the urban contemporary fantasy with Irish fairies, that had kind of been done a lot. There's quite a few books that are out similar, not that exact story, but similar themes. Urban fantasy's been around since, at least the 90s. And a lot of that stuff has been played out. So I think they wanted something fresh. And I don't think that there are a lot of genre fiction things that attach to TV, reality shows, soap operas, all of that. So that made it fresh. So that I think was just that it was new and it was different. And then apparently it was well written enough that they liked it and they thought that we can make this work. It was a full soap opera when it got picked up, but the acquisitions editor said, do you think you can make it more reality show? Because not too many people watch soaps these days. And I said, well, that's what you think, but okay. I think people still watch soaps. I mean, even if you don't watch Days of Our Lives, you're probably watching Grey's Anatomy, which is a soap opera. I mean, come on, let's face it. So fine, that was an easy fix because like I was saying a second ago, soaps and reality shows have a lot of common DNA. And that was the big change. And they said, if you'll do that, we want to get this book. And I said, yes. Whatever that secret formula was, I managed to find it.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, anybody can see why this book would be appealing, but I was just saying because of your previous two, like, what was it? Like, is timing also a part of it as well, do you think? So there's a lot to...
Yeah, timing is critical in all aspects of life. This is one of the things that I've learned as I got older. There's so many stories out there where they say, oh, I found my true love or my soulmate, and you're 15, 16, 17 years old. And it's like, that may be true. That is your soulmate for that time of your life. But by the time you're 25, 35, 45, you are a different person. That person is probably a different person. Something that worked for you then may not work for you now, and vice versa. Timing is so critical because we are not the same person from day to day to day, right? And the world is not the same from day to day to day. It feels like it might be like, oh, well, the grocery store is still there when I left it yesterday. But just the way timing works, you can have the best thing that is perfect today that is not the best thing that is perfect tomorrow.
Absolutely. And what are common misconceptions that people have about soap operas and about reality television?
Well, I think that soap operas particularly are undervalued. They are a bit creaky and old for for this day and age, but in the early days of radio and TV and all of that, um, they were really valuable. One of my favorite soap operas, One Life to Live, started out and very much had a social justice angle to it. You know, they were doing things in the 60s that simply were not done. And they may sound very dated now, and they may sound like things we would never do on shows now, but they were very forward thinking. A lot of soap operas helped people get health information that they wouldn't get otherwise. You know, a character would get cancer because they had certain symptoms. And there would be people in the audience who would say, wait a minute, that's similar to something I'm going through. Maybe I should see a doctor. And that's a very literal A to B. But I think people learned in a lot of ways from soap operas that we don't have that exactly now. Also, soap operas are super hard to make. I mean, the ones that come out where you have an hour of television 5 days a week with no reruns. I mean, that's like asking a small group of people to make 2.5 movies every week, right? It's 5 hours of TV is a lot, and so you barely get any rehearsals. If you get any rehearsals at all, there's no reruns, so you don't really get time off. I mean, your character you may say, I need a week off, and your character will suddenly be out of town for a week. But basically, it just keeps churning and churning and churning, and actors will get 40 or 50 or 60 pages every day they have to know. So that it's really hard. When I was covering the soap industry, they often referred to it as boot camp for actors, because you would get thrown in as a new person. It's like, sink or swim here. You got to memorize all this stuff. You're not going to get a lot of rehearsal, and you're going to have to do it again and again and again. So I have a lot of respect for both the storytelling aspect of it and the acting aspect of it. And I think that it's wrongly considered to be junk. At the same time, because of the nature of the fact that you're putting out 2.5 hours of TV a week or around that, it doesn't look as good. It can get very tired. They can use the same storylines. There's some real dated stuff. It can look very creaky. And when I was working for Soap Opera Digest, I remember thinking to myself, it's such a shame. They have 5 hours a week. They could tell some really intricate stories with real character development and all sorts of stuff. And they simply went back to the same stuff over and over again. Stranger comes to town, makes trouble, turns out to be related to somebody very important in town. It happened over and over and over again, the same stuff. And that made me a little sad, is that they had all this space and they could have done more. Reality television, I don't know about misconceptions per se, because just not between you and me and this interview audience, I'm not a huge fan of a lot of reality TV shows. I don't like the amped up truthiness of the idea that you're watching real life. There are script writers, there are people who are choreographing things for maximum drama. The people that they put on are often obscenely wealthy. And on the one hand, that's aspirational, like, oh, I hope someday to have a gold toilet myself. But it's not real life. And since it's called reality TV, it kind of grates on me. We have a problem with what's truth and what are facts in this country right now. And anything that kind of feeds into giving you the lie but calling it the truth gives me hives. That said, I do love some of the competition ones. I love Great British Baking Show. I love the craft ones where people are making something, where people are helping one another out, where it's not so I have to win, so you all have to lose kind of attitude. So I think there are some really great reality shows out there, but not necessarily not necessarily ones of fans of ones where it's like about a family or a workplace.
What was it like to include reality TV in your book? And what is the heart and soul of Tune In Tomorrow?
Incorporating reality TV into the book allowed me to expand a bit on one aspect of soap operas, which is that when you watch a show every day, whether it's on 5 days a week or you're binging it, it kind of occupies a brain space, and you know it's not real, but you feel like it's real. I mean, I watched years ago. I watched reruns of L.A. Law every night. Like it was on in a rerun on Lifetime every night at 7 o'clock, and I'd sit down at my dinner, and I'd like visit my friends, and I'd watch their show, and they had season after season after season. And when I'd gone through the entire thing, and there was a day when I didn't have one to watch, I'd be like, oh, my friends aren't coming over. And I know that they're not in my house. I'm not, delusional, but I was used to these characters and these situations and these personalities, and I liked them. I wanted to see more about them. And when I was writing Tune In Tomorrow, it's true that there are actors who have been on soaps for a long time who will tell you, people will come up onto them on the street and act like they are their character. Susan Lucci would often say, people would yell at her, how could you leave him? And that bridges to me into reality TV, where people are technically themselves, like the Kardashians are themselves, but they're also kind of playing characters. So it's like on soaps, you have characters who people think might be real, and you have real people on reality shows who are playing characters. And in the book, I was able to have some fan interactions with the actors on this. So I'm not sure if we've gotten a chance to explain, but really quickly. So Tune In Tomorrow is about a reality TV show that's run by mythical creatures, and it's for mythical creatures, but it stars humans. So we would have these mythical creatures coming up to some of the characters and talking to them as though they were their real characters. The main character, Star, goes to a mythical version of Central Park and finds centaurs, the half man, half horses, running around playing capture the flag. And one of them gallops up to her, and he's like, oh, it's Joe, or it's Sam, because Sam is her character on the show. He's like, it's Sam, and Sam, oh, what are you doing here? Can we help you? Are you investigating a special thing? Like, they kind of want to role play with you. They kind of want to play with you. And later on, she kind of has a moment where she has to say to him, look, because she likes him, she says, look, you understand that I'm not actually Sam. He's like, it's real enough for us. And I like that idea that, like, we know we're all playing here. This is real enough. But we also know it's the division of this is not actual reality. So I actually don't remember the original question, but that's how I managed to bridge the two of those things.
Yeah, no, you got into it. How do you feel about people responding so positively to Tune In Tomorrow?
Oh my God, that's the best feeling in the world. People who you know and love and are friends are probably going to read your stuff and tell you nice things. And you are never going to know how much of that is true. And that's great. I mean, they should be nice to you. They should tell you nice things. And, it's true. If it's a real piece of junk, real friends will tell you, look, you might want to try something else. But as much as I love hearing nice things from people I already know, that's a real ego boost, and it makes me want to write more. I actually get an extra thrill when somebody I don't know, I've never met, tells me, oh, this is, I enjoyed this so much, or this character's terrific. I got an email early on from, again, a total stranger, somebody I do not know through any of my channels. She wrote me and she said she finished reading the book because she had an advanced reading copy. She finished reading it, and Star reminded her of her mother, who had been an actor on soap operas and who always stood up to bullies. And, it just got her all emotional, and she practically cried, and she just loved the book so much because of that. And that's so many more times amazing than, your best friend telling you how great it is. And I'm so glad that she does. I mean, she had so many my best friend did have so many interesting questions for me. And she really did like the book. You can tell when somebody really likes the book, as opposed to thank you so much for loaning me your book. This was great. Boom. And they have no questions. So a total stranger coming out of the blue, somebody leaving a review on Amazon or Goodreads that really liked it. And I'm like, I don't know who this person is, but I'm so happy that it reached them. That's really the best feeling in the world, because then you really feel like you're making inroads. You're actually telling stories that people will remember, and they might want to come back to you and find out what else you've written. And you're creating a connection with somebody you didn't have a connection with before. And I think that's actually even more special.
For the people who know you personally and, they read your work,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that that's a way for them to understand you better?
Maybe. I think we all put a little bit of ourselves or a lot of ourselves into our work. There are aspects of Star that are like me. There are aspects of the other characters who are like me. But at the same time, I don't feel like I'm obligated while writing the book to make it, to make it all about me. Clearly, I don't want to write the character and make her me, literally. I want her to be able to have her own life. So I think that what I can say is that people who know me and want to and read the book may know me better because they will know something that has preoccupied my brain for so many years. I mean, I got started in this book in 2017 and it came out in 2022. So there are books I've been involved with longer, but that's a 5-year period that occupied a part of my brain. So if you want to know where I've been for the past 5 years, this is a good way to get started.
Randee, what writing techniques do you swear by?
I only know what works for me. I do not know if there's official techniques. I know one thing I try to do is if I'm not actively writing, I try to remind myself that I'm in an intake period. If you're not putting it out on paper, whatever you're seeing, whatever you're experiencing, whatever you're reading about, that's all intake. So you're filling up the well again. And then when you go to write, you have all of this stuff that you've experienced and seen and thought about that can be part of the story you're going to tell. So I try not to freak out if I don't write every single day. There are people who are like, you have to write every day. And I agree, you need to at least be thinking about the writing every day. But to me, the intake period is part of the writing. So if I'm not actually putting words on a page every day, as long as I'm thinking about whatever the next thing is I'm going to write about or doing research on it or coming up with a structure, that's writing also. So that's one thing. There are a lot of people who outline their stories. I generally have the story in my head, like I've just seen a movie and I could tell you where everything's is positioned and what they look like and all that. I tend to make the story in my head. For all my other books, I have never done an outline. I did an outline for Tune In Tomorrow because Tune In Tomorrow actually started as a possible game. One of the conventions I went to, there's a company called Choice of Games, and one of their representatives was there a lot. And they are text-based games that are on the web. And you do have to pay for them, but it's all like depending on every decision it's like a choose your own adventure. The decision you make affects the other options that are given to you. And when my agent said you should try something different, I contacted the Choice of Games people and said, well, maybe I should try one of these games because they pay well. And I'm like, okay, that'd be something to do. So she said, come up with a bunch of ideas, like a paragraph about what you want to do. And of all the ideas I came up with, this idea of an actress getting hired on a soap opera, there was no fantasy element. She liked that. And she said, can you come up with some sort of like outline for that? Do it by chapters or whatever. And I came up with this outline and she said, go ahead and start to write this up. And I started writing it up as a game. And then it got really weedy, and it was hard to know, like every time I made a decision, how it affected all these other decisions, and it sort of broke my brain a bit. And I said to her, I don't think this is for me, but can I take this story? And she said, yeah, we didn't pay you for it. It's your story, go ahead. So I started looking, so I had this outline all of a sudden for a whole novel. And I thought, well, I know the fantasy universe. What if I made it not a real reality show, but a fantastical reality show? So this time I did have an outline. I'm thinking that I will probably have some sort of outline going forward, even if it's not a formal outline, more like this happens, then this happens, and this happens. Mm-hmm. Because I remember when I was writing the book from this outline I had created, it was really helpful to be like, okay, when I finish this chapter, this is where I'll finish it. And the next chapter will start new here. And it's like, oh, it was like a guide that led me through my own book. So I can see the advantage of doing it both ways, but right now I would say some sort of outline might be good. So those are the two things I would suggest.
Do you plan on writing more books in the future? I'm guessing you do. You did mention going forward.
Oh yeah.
Going forward.
I mean, for me, it's only whether or not they'll get published. I will totally be writing more books in the future. I've already got 5 chapters of an idea for a book in the Tune In Tomorrow universe. You know, a next book in the series.
Yes.
I've got a whole other book that I wrote during the pandemic. You know, when we were all locked down during quarantine, I wrote a whole book, and maybe I want to get back to that. So yeah, I mean, I have no intention of stopping. I just hope people want to continue to publish it and get it out into the world.
What's the best advice you can give a debut author, especially one that wants to write in sci-fi and fantasy?
Right. Understand that it's a process. I think this applies for everybody, but understand that it's not, you know, whatever the movies or TV shows may say to you, you're not going to write a book that takes you 2 weeks to put together and then get it published 3 months later. I mean, these days you can publish anything almost instantly because you can self-publish on Amazon or whatever. But if you want to get a book out there, if you have a book in you and you want to write it and get it out there, understand that it's going, I wrote 11 drafts of Tune In Tomorrow, okay? That doesn't mean you'll write 11 drafts, but it means that the first draft and the second draft and the third draft, even the fifth draft weren't enough to get it in the shape that it needs to get in. So understand that this is a process. The first draft will always be you telling yourself the story. And once you've told yourself the story, then you'll know how to go in and tie everything together and shape it up to then start showing it to people. And then you'll probably write it again. And then you'll probably write it again and then send it to an agent. The agent will say, maybe change some of these things. And you'll say, okay, let me change that. So these things are not overnight. These things are not even 3 months or 6 months or a year. This is an ongoing process. So write it, learn from everybody else, be willing to take criticism, and understand that you're doing it because you have to do it in a way. You know, like if you're not doing it, you just don't feel your full self. You kind of have to do it. And so by having to do it, you'll then create a project that you're really passionate about and that other people get really excited about. Just have patience with it.
And on that note, Randee Dawn. Randee Dawn, thank you so much for coming on So Booking Cool. Enjoyed having you. Would love to speak with you again in the future. There's a lot to discuss with you.
Oh, you bet. And you know, you're welcome. And thank you so much for having me here, Jill. I really appreciate it.
Oh, of course, anytime in the future as well. And everybody, you definitely have to check out Tune In Tomorrow, okay? That is a must read. It's so creative. And, you know, obviously you're a great writer. I do want to ask you really quickly, do you think that your work and your years in journalism made it easy to complete deadlines when you were writing Tune In Tomorrow?
Yeah, I think so. It's not even just deadlines, but also to be able to accept edits. I don't get edited a lot with my journalism, but I've learned over the years that, it helps to give the editor what they are asking for. For creative writing, it's slightly different, but I'm much better at being edited now. And yeah, deadlines, I'm very good. I'm just kind of organized anyway, but yes, I think it's definitely made it possible for me to appreciate the need for deadlines and to meet them.
Yeah, you're organized. You're a go-getter too. When you were sharing your stories about how you went about things, love it, love it. How can people keep up with you, best keep up with you and all the awesome work that you're doing? And of course, get Tune In Tomorrow.
Of course. So if you go to randeedawn.com, and it's RANDEE Dawn, DAWN, randeedawn.com. That has pretty much everything there. There's links to all my books, and they have all links to where you can buy more books. I have a newsletter if you want to join that. That's on that page. I have a blog that I occasionally update. So any appearances, like anything you want to know, it's randeedawn.com. But if you can't remember that for any reason, you just remember tuneintomorrow.com. That will take you to my book. So there's a page on my webpage that is specific for the book. Tuneintomorrow.com will get you.
Yes, make sure you guys do that. And thank you again so much to all the viewers and listeners. Until next time, So Booking Cool.